Picture this. You roll up to the airport, suitcase in hand, totally ready for that much-needed vacation. And the departure screens are just blank. Nothing. No staff, no planes, absolutely no answers. Overnight, the company you trusted to fly you across the country or the world has just completely vanished. Poof. Folded. Thousands of people stranded, money sucked into a corporate black hole. It's a visceral, panic-inducing nightmare, right? But as we'll see today, it's not just a bad dream. It's a very real economic reality for the travel industry right now.
So here is our roadmap for today. We'll cover the 2026 bankruptcy wave, why exactly these massive airlines fail, the historical risks of the business, and most importantly, how to get your money back and protect your trip.
All right, starting off with Section 1, the 2026 bankruptcy wave.
Since the start of 2026, we've seen a rapid-fire succession of closures, and it paints a picture of a truly global crisis. Look at this timeline. At the end of 2025, Swedish charter airline H-Bird was officially declared bankrupt. Then, boom, March 2026 hits, Houston Starflight Aviation and Slovenian charter Alpavia both shut their doors. Fast forward to April, and Chinese regional carrier Joy Air grounds its entire fleet. And then May rolled around with some absolutely massive hits. Mexico's Magnicharters canceled flights, leaving thousands stranded, and then the giant, the absolute titan of the budget world, Spirit Airlines, officially threw in the towel. This isn't localized, folks. This is a massive wave pulling carriers out of the sky, literally all over the globe.
To really wrap your head around the sheer scale of this crisis, just look at this number. $5.5 billion. That was Spirit Airlines' stock market valuation at its absolute peak. $5.5 billion. It really goes to show that even industry heavyweights, companies with massive brand recognition and fleets of those iconic bright yellow planes, even they aren't immune to a total collapse. In this industry, size definitely does not guarantee survival.
Which brings us to Section 2. Why do airlines fail? Now, what's really interesting about this slide is, well, you have to ask, what economic forces are actually strong enough to drag these massive corporate machines into the ground? The core reasons are honestly pretty complex. We're talking skyrocketing jet fuel prices, which are only made worse by global geopolitical tensions. But it's not just fuel. It's absolutely intense competition from the legacy carriers, crushing monumental piles of corporate debt, an inability to fund basic maintenance, which leads to losing safety licenses, and even alternative transit options taking their passengers. Let's look at some real-world examples to make sense of this.
Take Joy Air, for instance, that regional Chinese carrier that canceled everything in April. They were suffocating under a staggering $734.9 million debt load. That's roughly 5 billion yuan. And they were perfectly squeezed from all sides. On one hand, they faced cutthroat competition from massive mainstream players like Air China. On the other hand, they were bleeding passengers to China's incredibly fast, super efficient, high-speed railway system. As the money stopped coming in, they couldn't even cover basic operations, which led to some severe disputes over unpaid wages with their own pilots. A total downward spiral.
But hey, it's not always about fuel and competition. Sometimes, the plane gets grounded because of severe safety and regulatory violations. Take Houston Starflight Aviation. Their air operator certificate was abruptly revoked by the FAA after claims surfaced that they literally faked pilot training records just to bypass safety audits. I mean, wow. Similarly, Mexico's Magnicharters had their certificates suspended because they literally just ran out of cash to cover basic technical support and spare parts. When the well runs dry, safety corners get cut, and regulators step in and shut the whole thing down.
Now, it's important to remember there are real people behind these massive corporate failures. Look at this quote from Dave Davis, the CEO of Spirit Airlines, right after they canceled their final flight from Detroit to Dallas. He called it, quote, tremendously disappointing and not the outcome any of us wanted. And you kind of feel that. Spirit had already filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection twice before. They did this desperate mad dash scramble, slashing routes, squeezing concessions from unions, all to try and save the company. But in the end, rising fuel costs just dealt that final fatal blow.
All right, moving on to Section 3, a historically risky business.
So while 2026 feels particularly brutal right now, if we zoom out a bit, you'll see this has historically always been an incredibly risky business model. The aviation graveyard, it is packed. Look at this list. Pre-2020, we lost absolute titans like Air Berlin and Thomas Cook. Then, between 2020 and 2023, Europe's largest regional airline, Flybe, completely collapsed, taking Romania's Blue Air and India's Go First with it. And recently, we said goodbye to Air Malta after 50 years of flying, Australia's Bonza, and like we talked about, Spirit.
It's a tough, tough industry.
Now, before we get into how to actually get your money back, we need to clarify the legal realities of what bankruptcy actually means here. If an airline files for Chapter 11 reorganization, it means they're restructuring their debt to keep the lights on. So actually, your flight might still happen. But Chapter 7 liquidation, that is the terminal scenario. Everything is sold off, the doors are locked, and operations cease immediately. Game over.
Which leads us nicely into Section 4, getting your money back. So, the crucial point here, and this is super important to understand, is that you cannot just call up a bankrupt airline and demand a refund. It'd be nice, but bankruptcy law often legally prohibits them from issuing refunds or vouchers right away. Why? Because they have to freeze their remaining assets to pay off their biggest, highest priority creditors first. We're talking the banks and suppliers they owe billions to. As a passenger, legally, you are considered a general unsecured creditor, which basically means you're standing at the very back of a very long line to get paid.
So how do you bypass that line? Well, the U.S. Department of Transportation recommends a very specific three-step sequence. Step 1, contact the airline to verify if your flight is actually canceled. Like we said, if it's just a reorganization, that plane might still be flying. If it is canceled, you move to Step 2, which is honestly your best weapon. Call your credit card company. If you bought that ticket with a credit card, you are legally protected under the Fair Credit Billing Act for services not rendered. You just request a chargeback. Step 3, if you paid with a debit card or, heaven forbid, cash, check your travel insurance policy right away to see if supplier bankruptcy is covered.
And that brings us to our final part, Section 5, how to protect your trip. Let's look at the absolute worst-case scenario playbook. What happens if the airline goes bankrupt while you are already stranded abroad? First rule, don't panic. The DOT's advice is to immediately check with competitor airlines. Believe it or not, in the chaotic wake of a major airline collapse, rival carriers will often step up. They'll offer heavily discounted standby fares to stranded travelers, basically waiving all their usual advance purchase rules to help you get home. And if you are just totally out of options internationally, reach out to the U.S. State Department for emergency assistance.
And this brilliantly illustrates our next point. If you only remember one personal finance rule from this whole explainer, please make it this specific DOT guideline regarding your credit card. To get your money back under the Fair Credit Billing Act, you have a very strict 60-day window. Your credit card issuer must receive your dispute notice no later than 60 days after the date you got the first monthly statement that listed the flight charge. So there's a ticking clock here, folks. Do not sit around waiting for the airline's bankruptcy court drama to play out, or you will completely miss your window to get your cash back.
Which leaves us with this final provocative thought. Look, we all love a great deal, but when we see skyrocketing fuel prices, fierce competition, and the incredibly fragile economics that can literally turn a massive airline to dust overnight, are the upfront savings of a super cheap budget flight truly worth the risk of waking up to an overnight cancellation? It's a tough calculation, but it's one every single traveler is going to have to make, as this bankruptcy wave just keeps rolling through the industry. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me on this explainer today. I really hope you feel far more prepared for your next trip, and I'll see you next time.